Hey, everybody. It's a great day to be alive. I'm Jay Cowan, Business Owner Exit Strategies.
And I'm Wendy Dickinson with Ascend to Sell. Welcome.
Thanks for letting me shake it up a little bit.
Absolutely. Go on the wild side. Let Jay go first.
It's a beautiful rainy day, but we're cozy and dry in the coal mine.
Yeah, we're at Coal Mine Coffee, and I'm having their lavender and honey seasonal coffee offering, and I love it. It's delicious.
It's such an adventurous. I'm just having coffee and cream.
Mm. On a rainy day like this, we need something like this.
Yeah.
So, everybody, today, Jay and I are going to talk about fear. And it's not a topic that a lot of business owners are comfortable thinking about, much less talking about. And that's one of the reasons why we feel like it's so important to talk about it. With my work, I see that oftentimes fear gets in the way of business owners making their succession plans, in the way of making capital investments, in the way of seeking out investors, or really sometimes fear gets in the way of taking their business to that next level of growth.
And I as well. We've talked before about why owners resist the idea of doing any kind of exit or transition planning, because if it involves their being no longer involved in the business one day, there's a real fear about who they're going to be when they're no longer doing that. And we've talked about that. But then I've also know of owners who their business is growing, but they really haven't been able to pull the trigger on whether or not they're going to expand to a different territory, a different area that would be a good fit for their business, because perhaps it's fear of the unknown, or just their concern about how they're going to manage it. But when everything else says, this is a good idea, you should do it. And they just can't seem to pull that trigger.
You know, Jay, I have to say that I believe that there are neurological reasons for that. I believe that, okay, so think about it. In that scenario that you just described, that person is generally very decisive, right?
Absolutely.
Historically been very comfortable with making those decisions, right?
That's right. They've often embraced entrepreneurial terror.
Yeah. So why all of a sudden would they get stuck on this one thing that to everybody else looks like it's such a great idea? And I think what happens is that because we don't understand how our brains are wired, we then take that as, a sign that maybe we shouldn't do that thing. And, you know, I'm not sure that that's always the most accurate interpretation, because I think what happens is that we're still dealing with a brain that has modified, but no major modifications for the last 100,000 years, let me just add. But we're still working with a brain that was keeping us alive in those days of saber-toothed tigers. And so when that limbic system gets activated with that fight, flight, or freeze reaction, well, that kind of overload of those cortisol type brain chemicals just keeps us paralyzed.
So in other words, it's not a typical symptom of, business owners never having a real problem with making decisions as long as they have all the information. This is really beyond that type of situation.
Yeah, because when we understand that that's how our brains are hardwired, then we're not likely to do that thing of, this must be my gut instinct telling me not to do this thing. Sure, we need to be comfortable with recognizing and being aware of our fears and our emotions in general. We need that to really get in touch with our intuitive sense. But in this situation, I don't think so. Not for somebody who's historically been very decisive, has embraced entrepreneurial terror.
So as a business owner, how do we keep our how do we keep our brains from getting in the way like that? How do we know is that really what's holding us back?
I think that's a great question, and there are actually some pretty simple things that we can do. Because what happens in that situation when our fight or flight or freeze reaction is activated, then we end up taking our executive functioning offline. And so the first thing to do is to bring that back online. And so one of the things we can do is just reorient ourselves to the environment. So like, and if we could do something like, just I'm feeling one hand against the other, right?
Oh, you weren't just trying to think right there. You were actually doing that.
So tapping, or
Mhm.
or maybe I'm tapping my feet or moving my body in some way. It's like, oh, then it reminds me to breathe.
Okay.
There's another
Makes
one
sense.
that is called the SBNRR, which I remember that by saying the Siberian North Railroad, but it basically means stop and take a breath and then
Mhm.
notice, really notice everything around
Oh,
you.
okay.
And that'll also, between the breath and then noticing everything around you, it brings you, grounds you again. And so it brings your executive functioning back online.
It sounds a lot like getting centered,
Yeah, exactly.
recentering yourself
Yeah.
as to where you are.
Yeah, but now we know that there's brain chemistry behind that.
Hmm. Okay. Well, you know, and obviously, like most things, there's a process to these issues, and when all else fails, you know, when you have a means, you've developed a process for how you're going to getting recentered. Like you said, whether it's meditation or slapping your head or doing the rubber band thing on your wrist or something. Just of course remembering to do those things. But I could see that it's real easy to find yourself really getting diffused on some issues, and you can't understand what is it. Why can't I just make a decision of doing this? And while I still can't make that decision, it tends to affect me in many other ways too, and the stress starts building up a little bit, and I have, in my case, at times said, why can't I just go ahead and decide what I'm going to do about this?
Well, and in your advisory role, or any of you out there who are advisors, you may, right in front of you, you may see one of your clients going through this kind of thing where they have gone offline as far as their ability to make a decision or to track what you're saying. And so one of these particular techniques could offer you an opportunity to bring that person back online. So maybe what you do instead as an advisor, Jay's got a pen here, so maybe you take the pen and you're like, well, maybe we should just get up and walk around for a minute and take a break. So you're bringing that person's attention back to you and back to the sound, and if you get them up, they're going to have to take a breath.
You know, something similar in my own personal experience, and I'm a high touch person. If you haven't figured that out by now, it's because I'm always trying to hug people. Like, I drive her crazy.
You are a hugger.
But I respond to the touch, and so at times when my wife and I are together, and it appears to her that I'm starting to sort of get that look in my eye, and I'm starting to act really stressed, or whatever's going on, it doesn't seem right. She will just come up to me and talking without making a deal. She'll just say, "Hey." And then it's amazing that suddenly brings me right back. So I've experienced that in my personal home life, and so it make absolute sense to me. We can do that in our business world as well. Just kind of figure out what works for us, and getting our attention, getting our bringing us to center, if you will.
Yeah, and one of the other situations that I think that this can be really handy is, and where fear plays a big role. If we have a client who's a business owner who's considering selling their company, and let's say they're beginning to go through the process, so they have all the right team members on their team. They have an exit planner with M&A experience. They have a coach with M&A experience. They have an investment banker or a business broker with M&A experience. They have an attorney with M&A experience. So they've got all the players in place. And so among the array of people who are presented as prospective buyers, there's a private equity group. And let's say that private equity group comes in and says, we would love to buy your company. This is where we think you could take your company. This is where we think we could fit in with that particular goal. And this is what we would like to see and what we can offer you as a business owner. And if that business owner is having difficulty and goes offline, their fear reaction is triggered. That limbic system takes over. And maybe they don't even recognize it as fear. It's just a resistance, right?
Right.
Whoa, wait a minute. Where are you taking my company? And who are you to come in and do this? We would invite you to really take a break and follow one of these recommendations. Take a breath, take a walk. Ask yourself, what has triggered this reaction? And if you're the advisor, ask the client the series of questions. Let's step aside, take a break in the conversation with the private equity person, and figure out what's triggered this. What set you off?
Yes. And sometimes that may be all it takes.
Yeah.
Sometimes it may go deeper. There may be other things. But, you know, if in my previous, oh, and by the way, when I talk about needing to be centered by being touched, I'm not talking about being slapped in the face. I had to clarify that.
No, we
sometimes
won't go
she wants
there.
to do that. But again, when I'm talking to someone who says, I've got a territory that I continually ask myself that I really should go there. Is it because of the fact that they've got a salesperson in an area that is not exactly next door now, so they've got to put a little more trust in having somebody do it? Or is it a fear of growth because they're worried about what's going to change once I start doing this? This is a whole nother thing. And do I really want to grow, you know, in a much more aggressive, faster area? And then this then comes in the self-doubt perhaps, and the fear of losing control, and, you know, and then it might be those kinds of things. And I think sometimes that's what it is too. I do know that oftentimes people will say, I don't know why so-and-so just can't seem to make a decision on this.
Right, and I think it's been interpreted almost as self-sabotage, but I think we also need to give business owners credit that they have a lot of decisions they have to make, and they only have so much bandwidth.
Right, that's right.
And so if an owner or the owner's advisors can recognize where they get stuck in the process, then they have the opportunity to navigate that obstacle and successfully make the decision. You know, I want to go back to something else you just said, and listeners, I have to tell you, Jay brought up a great point about when our roles change, that is oftentimes perceived by our brains as a threat to our identity.
No doubt. And that can be a real significant issue, because when you're, you know, it's inertia, I guess. And even though we're moving, we've always been doing in this role. And the minute we start talking about changing that, we feel like we're presented with a whole new set of problems. I don't know what I'm going to do. We tend to live in everything in our own head, and we're not taught, even if it's talking to someone else, having the opportunity to talk that through with somebody.
Yeah.
And oftentimes owners can really kind of solve it themselves if they feel they can have a conversation with somebody in confidential, you know, awareness. And that might be the case, but, you know, certainly when you're fighting the fires every day, it's really hard to suddenly say, all right, I got to stop for a minute and really think about this. And well, I'll do it when I get home, and then get home, other things happen. You're tired, and, you know, so yeah, I think there's something significant too about the physical aspect of stepping away, going to work out, play around the golf, tennis, you know, do something that kind of gets your mind off it for a little bit, because it's taxed, it's overloaded, you know, so you need that ability to get away from that. But it does impact, and it can happen in many ways for any particular reason. And it does, you know, it's we hate inaction. We hate.
Yes, we do.
You know,
yeah.
And so I think this is a very important conversation, because I'm sure there's not a person that's out there that hasn't had this come up and sort of get stuck on it.
Yeah.
What do we do? Why is this a problem for me? Because who doesn't want, and, you know, back to that question, who doesn't want to grow, right? But there are people who want to just sort of ride.
Yeah.
You know, I want to be in the rocking chair for a while. I'm kind of tired of
and
fighting the fires.
No judgment. That's
Yeah.
if that's what the person would really like to do, then we honor that decision for sure.
But, you know, the old saying is, you know, you either grow or die. So you can control that and know what I think that kind of goes back to reassessing your personal values and why you're doing what you're doing, you know, and because maybe you had an idea at the very beginning, but it's been many years since you revisited that.
I think that's a great point.
You know, and so is this what is my expanding going to do for me other than bring in more gross revenue? is that the real reason I'm doing it, or is there something else?
Right.
There should be more of a strategic reason that fits that personal
Yes.
goal, I think.
I agree. I'm wondering, would you like some specific examples of recommendations? Maybe if the person is by themselves and they realize they're stuck on a decision, what are some questions that maybe you can just grab some pen and paper? And I suggest that because, again, when we physically write something down, it creates neural pathways, and it opens some thought processes that we may not be able to do if we're just typing into our laptop or phone. So, first of all, ask yourself, what triggered the reaction? The resistance, the fear, whatever you want to call it, what triggered that reaction? That would be the place I would begin. And then what were you thinking or telling yourself about that situation? Because sometimes we also don't realize how negatively we speak to ourselves, right?
Yes, that's right. We tend to forget that. And we always tend to think of ourselves more negatively than we might have somebody else would see us, react to us.
Yeah, so if you sit down and you start writing and you say, well, dumbass, this is what I've done to myself again. I don't know why I've thought about this decision 50 times and I have not arrived at a decision. Just the way that you said, well, dumbass, began, that's negative self-talk.
Well, that went right past me. I thought it was nothing different about dumbass.
Yeah, see,
right?
There we go. And then how are we setting ourselves up to have the reaction? I mean, are we giving ourselves enough rest? Are we taking enough breaks? Are we giving ourselves food that will fuel our bodies? Are we setting aside some time to think about the decision instead of just expecting ourselves to make it on the fly?
In some ways, again, this is like akin to weight loss. One of the things that's always been recommended is you track your day and whatever you're eating, whatever you're drinking, all through the day. And then at the end of the day, if you, without referring to what you've written down, if you just sort of go back in your mind and said, so what did I eat today? Oh, I just had, I had eggs and bacon, and then, I had a sandwich for lunch, and then one coffee, and now I'm going to have dinner. But when you go back and look at the recording of what you did, you find out, oh my God, I forgot all about all these little things that I had, the candy or whatever.
Bye, Trish.
Bye. Goes the landlord. And so it's a really interesting thing. So when you start tracking that and recording, you sort of start building a little more muscle memory in there. And I think that's how I bridge to what you're talking about, and that is you develop a sense of, okay, when you start feeling that way, or you recognize here's what's going on, say, okay, so what do I need to do? Let me go back to, have I been sleeping, getting enough sleep lately? Do I have some, how do I feel about some things? Is my blood pressure, out of control for some reason? But little things we can do for ourselves because it's going to happen again.
Oh yeah.
So
actually, several times a day, right? Sometimes.
That's true.
Sometimes I feel like if I'm in one of those patterns, then it happens several times a day until I take the steps that I need to kind of sort myself out.
And procrastination works very much is probably the simplest form. Why do we put something off?
Yeah, that's true too.
And then we know, all right, well, so what's keeping me from starting to do this right now?
And then, I think that going back to what you said earlier about the vision, if you can ask yourself that series of questions, really take stock of how you have been treating yourself over those last few days, and then revisit that vision and think, okay, which of my options in making this decision is in alignment not only with this vision that I have, but in alignment with my values and how I want to show up in this company as its owner. Yep.
Going back to the mission vision conversation.
Yeah,
exactly. Right. We make it harder on ourselves, but we say, wait a minute, I developed this. How does this fit?
Right.
That's an excellent point.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And I think that the mission and vision can kind of serve as a guardrail for some of our decisions in our decision-making process.
That's right.
So,
those bowling lane bumper guards.
Yeah. And the other thing that I actually had an opportunity to be part of a group that heard 3 women who are very accomplished people, and they serve not only on privately held company boards, but also publicly held company boards. And one of the things we talked about last night was the challenge that there is at times in decision making, especially if you have a board, but also decision making as far as succession planning. And then what is the role of the board in those decisions? And probably a lot of you are at a place where you own your own company and you may or may not have a board. But for the purposes of our conversation today, I wonder, if you don't have a board, could you gather a group of acquaintances, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 people that you really trust, and see if they'll act as your board?
Even if you just want to call it your sounding board.
Yeah, exactly.
So it doesn't have to be something as any more formal than that. But but people who maybe share similar experiences, ideally, and can share with you, hey, when I've had that happen to me, here's what I've done. But not those people who are trying to give you advice, because there's a big difference between sharing experiences and providing advice too. So I think that's another really good reason. When we're in business, we all should have some group of people who know us and know what we're about. And like you said, people you have confidence and trust in, that you can talk about these things. And sometimes that's all it takes. And sometimes they'll point out something that's really obvious, but for whatever reason you weren't getting it, but now you can. So self-help.
I do feel like a coach or advisors could act as your board members if you allow yourself to reach out and say to them, I have a decision to make. I have a number of options that I consider viable. I'm not sure which is the best one. And perhaps just talk it through with those folks.
Well, and coach and advisor will be asking more than telling.
Yeah.
And asking okay, so let's talk about this situation, and why do you feel right now? What have you done? What have you done up to this point to help you think through this process? And there, sometimes that's all we might need, is to get that reminder that's lurking back here somewhere, that we just need to be able to bring to the front. So yeah, the thing about I hate to go back a little bit, but it just sort of makes me think about this is. I really was one of these people who loved the fact that they invented the keyboard so I can type. Of course, I used to type, but my handwriting is so horrible. So
mine is too.
It looks like a doctor's.
Mine too.
And so I can write things, but yet I still feel the need to write something out on paper. And I think you've really helped me identify it, because so why is it about writing in the paper first that makes me get through this better than just trying to type, because it's so easy. I don't have to cross it out. And I think it's the physical aspect of doing that combined that's really making a significant impact for me.
It does clear those neural pathways. So, I really believe that.
Yeah, we really do. It really is a connection in the physical and the mental.
Yeah.
It can't just be one.
No, it can't.
One way or the other.
I guess the last thing that I've noticed and have had a chance to speak with people about is that business owner, and as far as fear is concerned, that business owner who realizes that he or she may not have the skills and gifts to take the company to that next level. And then what will their role be if they are not the CEO or the president leading that organization through that next stage of growth? And I feel like that's another symptom, another signal to us to really take a look at triggers, and also take a look at what we're saying to ourselves. Because being aware of what our gifts are, our skills, what our strengths are, and then at the same time knowing what our blind spots are and knowing where our gaps in knowledge are, should set us up to be able to be a leader and yet gather others to fill those knowledge gaps.
That's probably the most significant thing of anything you've brought up today. Because again, as an owner, hey, we made this business, we built this business. How can anybody think that I don't have what it takes to take it where it needs to go? But really being able to be true to yourself and understand that. And or another way of putting it is maybe the way of disguising it to yourself. It's like, what was it that I really love to do? What is it that I really can't stand to do? What is it that I don't do well? And I need to get rid of all that. Now that's kind of basic, but some people never get started with that. And then as you realize that you've got people in place that you always have to evaluate, is this person that's handling the accounting for me going to help, has the ability to get me to that next level? Now I've got to make a decision as to, they're a great employee, but we're not going to, how am I going to, I got to replace that person. And, if I can't train them, if they can't be brought up, then I need to replace them. We're not looking to replace ourselves in terms of take the business away from us, but it's more about, okay, am I at the position I'm in now, am I the best person to do what needs to go? Because many of business owners are true entrepreneurs, and once they arrive at a certain level, they have to be managers.
And it's not fun anymore.
And they're not good at it, and that's keeping them from doing what they need to do. So, yeah, I think that's a difficult step to make, but ultimately, it really can make all the difference in terms of what kind of business you're going to have.
Yeah.
When you rotate.
I would say and encourage all of you, whether you're an advisor or a business owner, to take a look at not necessarily categorizing that as a fear response. And I would suggest that in its place, you consider using the term a maker response, because as a maker, as a creator of a business, and creating your maker response, that you are no longer the person to lead in the day-to-day operations of the company, it might mean that your higher calling is to hold the space and be the keeper of the vision, of the mission and the vision.
You guys have a great way of positioning that,
Thanks. I just think that's undervalued at times.
I totally agree with that. I think that, the difference between, understanding what the real difference is between being the visionary and the strategic person in your company versus the doer. There's a big difference there, and the doers are enjoying doing, but that's not, and oftentimes that might be what's necessary at the very beginning, but once your business matured, it's not going to go any further. And as I said earlier, if that business is not going to grow any further in some way, shape, or form, it's going to regress at some point.
It becomes really very much so exposed to the risk of disruption or stagnation.
Exactly, loss of key people.
Yeah,
any of those things that could set you down on a downward trend.
And I also believe that maker response is, and that keeper of the vision and the mission is very much aligned with that whole entrepreneurial spirit, right? It frees that person up. They're not tied down to the day-to-day operations. They can look for what's in the future and not only recreate their own role, but recreate possibly the role of the company.
Like you said, not looking at it as the end of something, but okay, I'm just taking another step up or forward.
Yeah.
For the benefits of this company, but also for my own personal desires and needs, and not look at it as a dreaded thing to avoid. If we can make that paradigm shift, it can mean, it makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be such a dreaded decision to make, and another decision to avoid making.
Exactly. And actually that's might be a good place to close. Any closing thoughts?
Well, there's a couple of articles, unless we've already talked about it before, we were gonna bring up that you might want to take a look at. No, not at all. So look for, is fear of failure holding back your business? Just type that in.
I actually put it in the show notes.
Oh, you did? Okay,
Yeah, the
good.
links.
Thank you. So that you have the links there, the five top fears that paralyze small business owners, and 3 ways to overcome your fear of business development. All of those have been excellent background information for you to, I think, really make the most out of this conversation today.
And I guess my last thought is that we recognize that your brains are going to resist change, and that's totally normal and totally expected. So get yourself some people on your board who can offer you the support that you need while you make those necessary changes.
By the way, did you ever hear the story about how many Virginians it takes to change a light bulb, Wendy?
Oh Lord, no, I have not.
It takes 4. Speaking of change,
Really?
it takes 4. 1 to change the bulb, and the other 3 to talk about how great the old bulb was.
Oh, that is so Virginia, isn't
yes.
it? Yeah, that's great, Jay.
I'm looking for an
Thank you.
opportunity to use that one.
Okay, that's great.
All right.
Let us all know how you like that.
Well, this has been great, and hope everybody has a great day. I'm Jay Cowan, Business Owner Exit Strategies.
And reach out to myself, to me, Wendy Dickinson of Ascend to Sell, or to Jay, if we can be of any help in your efforts to take your business to the next level. We also want to encourage you to join us next week. Jay and I are going to be discussing decision making without regret on Thursday, March 28th at 2 p.m. Eastern.
That should be fun.
Yeah. So thanks again, and I hope you guys have a good rest of the afternoon.
Bye.
Bye.